Hello viewers, welcome back. And in this video, I shall try to talk about a play written by uh, Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o, if I'm not wrong. And it is a realist play, and it was published first premiered or first staged in 1976. This play was written in response to colonialist writing, and it shows the divisive mechanizations of the imperialist power. And the title of this play, it also highlights key aspects of the play itself, how the trial of Kimathi and was progressed owing to Mau Mau revolution or Mau Mau rebellion movement and its contribution in the freedom movement of Kenya from imperialism or from imperialist power Britain. We all know half of the African nations were colonized by European powers, especially Britain or England. And to uproot colonial power, some of the native African or native Kenyan, they have tried to form a freedom army, and through the armed revolution, they had tried to overthrow the British colonial authority in their own native land. So among the freedom fighters, uh, Dedan Kimathi, he is one of them who had left no stone unturned to overthrow the rule of Britain in African nation called Kenya. So before moving on, we must know about the Mau Mau rebellion. So Mau Mau rebellion, it is a Mau uprising. It is an uprising that was occurred in 1952 and it lasted till 1960. It was 8 long years of struggle. And Mau Mau revolt or Kenya emergency, it was a war in the British Kenya colony, and it was means British had fought to keep the way they were ruling, and it started from 1920 to 1963, and it was the war between the Kenya Land and Freedom Army called KLFA, also known as Mau Mau, and the British authorities. So in the KLFA or Kenya Land and Freedom Army, there are many native African tribes. They were gathered together to fight against the cruelty of Britain, and it was especially dominated by Kikuyu people of Africa, Meru people, and Imbu people. So it comprised units of Kamba and Maasai people also who fought against the white European colony settlers in Kenya, the British Army, and the local Kenya regiment, also called British colonists, local auxiliary militia, and pro-British Kikuyu people. And the leader of KLFA, he was Dedan Kimathi. Dedan Kimathi, let's try to know briefly about him. Actually, the capture of rebel leader, Field Marshal, self-styled Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi, he was a fierce freedom fighter. He was captured on 21st October 1956, and he was also signaled the defeat of the Mau Mau and essentially ended the British military campaign. However, though the British had captured the rebel leader of Kenya people, Dedan Kimathi, but their fightings were still going on. However, the rebellion survived until after Kenya's independence from Britain, and it was driven mainly by the Meru units led by Field Marshal Musa Wariyama and General Baimungi. And Baimungi, he was one of the last Mau Mau generals who was killed shortly after Kenya attained self-ruler independence. So now let's try to know about about this freedom fighter, Dedan Kimathi. Dedan Kimathi Waichuri, he was born on 31st October 1920 and died on 18 February 1956. He was born as Kimathi wa Wasiuri in what was then British Kenya, was the senior military and spiritual leader of the Mau Mau uprising, and he was widely regarded as a revolutionary leader. He had also led. I have already told you who was he, but let's now go on with the PDF. So I have already said that he was a fierce revolutionary, and British had always uh, afraid of him. So for that reason, they had been hunting him since its inception, and uh, in 1957, after the capture, he was executed by the British. And Kimathi, he is also credited
with leading efforts to create formal military structures within the Mau Mau, and it was also convening a war council in 953. And he, along with Musha Warima and Mutoni Kirima, who was one of the three field marshal, they had done commendable job to get freedom from the British. Kenyan nationalists, they viewed him as the heroic figurehead of the Kenyan freedom struggle against British colonial rule, while the British government saw him as a terrorist. So this is very common in our India too. You might have seen the British had designated Bhagat Singh as a terrorist, and even Subhash Chandra Bose as terrorist, but not as freedom fighter or not as a revolutionary. So that was the attitude of British towards its colonial people. Despite being viewed with disdain or hatred by the first two presidents of independent Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta and Daniel Arap Moi, Kimathi and his fellow Mau Mau rebels, they had officially recognized as heroes in the struggle for Kenyan independence under the Y. Kibaki administration. So here some pronunciation may not be up to the standard, and I'm sorry for that, because as you all know, the pronunciation of African language and words are utterly different. So let's move on. So it was culminating in the unveiling of a Kimathi statue in 2007. This was a little introduction about the uh, protagonist of our novel. Now let's try to know little bit about the uh, life of the protagonist. And Kimathi's fight for an independent Kenya, it came to an end in 1956, that I have already told you. And on 21st October of that year in 1956, Ian Henderson, who was a British colonial police officer at that time, and he had been on an obsessive hunt for Kimathi, and he managed to trap him in his hideout in the forest. Then Kimathi was shot in the leg and captured by the tribal policeman called uh, Dirangu Mao, if I'm not wrong, who found Kimathi armed with a panga, a bladed African tool like a machete, and his capture, it marked the beginning of the end of the forest war, and the image of Kimathi being carried away on stretcher was printed in leaflets by the British. Over 1,20,000 were distributed. So it shows how British were mad or crazy after Kimathi, and when he was captured, so they were overjoyed. And it also tried to demoralize the Mau Mau and their supporters, and Kimathi was charged with possession of 38 Waverly Scott revolver. And a court presided over by Chief Justice O'Connor, and with an all-black jury of Kenyans sentenced him to death while he lay in a hospital bed at General Hospital Nyeri. His appeal was dismissed, and the death sentence was upheld. So that was his tragic end. And through this play, the writer has tried to depict his poignant and real life story. But the day before his execution, he wrote a letter to Father Marino asking him to get his son an education. He said, "He is far from many of your schools, but I trust that something must be done to see that he starts earlier under your care." And he has also written about his wife Mukami by saying that she is detained at committee prison, and I suggest that she will be released sometime. And I would like her to be comforted by sisters, like, for example, Sister Modester, etc., for she too feels lonely. And if by any possibility she can be near the mission, as near Mathari, so that she may be so close to the sisters and to the church. And then he has also asked to see his wife. And the morning of the execution, Mukami was allowed to see Kimathi. The two chatted for close to 2 hours before the execution or the death. Then he told her that I have no doubt in my mind that the British are determined to execute me, and I have committed no crime. My only crime is that I am a Kenyan revolutionary who led a liberation army. Now, if I must leave you and my family, I have nothing to regret about. My blood will water a tree of independence. So that was the patriotic feeling or attitude of a native Kenyan, right? And through this example, we have also got to know how a person can be extremely mad for his own motherland. And in the early morning of 18 February 1957, he was executed by hanging at Committee Maximum Security Prison, and he was buried in an unmarked grave, and his burial site remained unknown for 62 years until recently on 25 October 2019, when the Dedan Kimathi Foundation reported that the grave site had been identified at the committee prison grounds. So now let's try to know about him through the play. We all know that Dedan Kimathi, he was a legendary hero of Mau Mau liberation movement against British rule in Kenya and their cultural, political, and economic aspirations. The mission of Dedan Kimathi uh, is to recover the lost identities of self-respect or self-respect of Kenya, their proud heritage. So he was the hope of freedom in the play, and it also stood as the representative of the Kenyan peasantry and masses. Uh, if we talk about a critic, then Pratibha Nagpal, in her critical analysis, she said that the play wishes to depict the heroic struggle of the African people. The play is also written in three movements that symbolically merge past, present, and future. The play also opens and ends with the trial of Dedan Kimathi. Besides, the play also consists of four trials which are centered on Dedan Kimathi. The first trial is when Dedan Kimathi is captured by British officers and is assured that there will be fair trial, but it is ironical since the trial is anything but fair towards Dedan Kimathi. So if British says that trial will be fair, so that's one of the greatest lies of the history, right? British will never em- embrace if any kind of revolt is done against them. So if someone says like that, and if he is from British community, then whatever he will say that will be futile. And the same thing was told to Dedan Kimathi also, that his trial will be fair, as the English says at the time that English people believe in equal law and equal justice, but in reality that was not the case. So the blacks were mime in the background. The trial would only ensure that the colonizers got their way and keep on ruling. The only purpose of the trial was to torture and tempt Dedan Kimathi into surrendering and revealing names of fellow revolutionists. The four trials were under the second movement, which focused inside the courtroom and on the divide between whites and blacks. Then the first trial was an encounter between Saw Henderson and Dedan Kimathi. He told him that if he pleaded for his life, he would be spared. Dedan Kimathi rejected it and named his comrades who had gone to the British side. So, if you are a true patriotic or if you are a true revolutionary, you will never appeal for your life, right? So the same thing also can be seen here. Dedan Kimathi had never apologized to the British for his just for his living or just to feel alive. And he had reaffirmed his faith in revolution, and he had also promised to have a vision of free Kenya. And in the second trial, a delegation of people they met Dedan Kimathi, the banker. They said economic development in Kenya had taken place because of colonialism. So in every place or in every colonial community or society, you will get that some people will always be with the colonial power side, and the same thing can be seen in the Kenyan uh, country also, right? So he has also stressed that uh, armed resistance ruined economic progress, and it became visible to the reader that the people who build a country will be enslaved while the master will harvest. In the third trial, a politician, priest, and businessman they came to tempt Dedan Kimathi. Dedan Kimathi was caught in the dilemma of pain and fear, and he was confused between accepting the master's offer to save his own life and fulfillment of freedom dreams. This time, an African businessman was spokesperson, and he told that he was also part of black man's dream at one point of time, and that Dedan Kimati had won the war because there was no more racism and color bar in administration, business, public places, loans, and acquisition of land. Then the reader also knew that in spite of all this, the natives had not got any political freedom, and only regional freedom was given. So that was how Britishers' policy was at that time. And Dedan Kimathi had also rejected politicians' offer and ridiculed him for giving regional freedom when the collabor- collaborators were the reason for British control on the native land. The priest then says that he will Africanize the church, but Dedan Kimathi calls him a betrayer of true faith. Then the priest is removed from native reality, and he is equivalent to the settlers and is unworthy of being called child of God. Then, at last, the fourth trial it began again, and then it included Saw Henderson, and he asked him to tell the whereabouts of uh, Matenji, and he was brutally beaten and tortured in chamber. And Dedan Kimathi was more in pain in mental terms rather than physical pain. Then he realizes that there were traitors among his own people. He knew that the will of natives is stronger than his temptations and tortures. So this is the same thing that was the old rule of Britishers, and that is divide and rule. They always try to gain some um, confidence or gain some support from some sections of the society. Then they will try to persuade others to join them, and they always try to suppress the native people, one who tries to overthrow them. That's it. Thank you so much.